In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, I am grateful to God for giving this opportunity to be with you as a small contribution that I can have for this beautiful and fruitful initiative of World Council of Churches. And I think it's a very good example of not only learning and discussing theological, spiritual aspect of interfaith dialogue, but also to live together for 3 weeks and make, through your personal contacts, understanding of our commonalities easier and more established. I am also thankful to Dr. Amos for her kind invitation, and I hope that my humble presentation today in this session and the next session would help you with understanding some aspects of Islam. I cannot do justice to the topic because no religion can be introduced in such a short time. But the idea is at least we can have some major points, and sometimes even for people who have the same faith, it's helpful to review some of the highlights and major points about your own religion. And for people who belong to other faiths also, maybe it's helpful to know some of the basics of the other faith, and perhaps then those things that are more interesting to you, more relevant to you, you can explore more further. I thought that to make it easier, I would base part of my discussion on the book that you have been given, Islam, Doctrines, Practices, and Morals. This is a book that gives you some of the basics of Islam. And I would like also to mention in the second session some of reflections about Islam and other religions, which is not in this book. So hopefully we quickly review this, and there would be some time for me in the second session to talk about the way Islam regards other religions and what is the Islamic project for unity of mankind. Before we go to the book, I just would like to mention a few things that I'm sure you are all familiar. Some of the maybe statistics and some of the thing about the religious landscape of the world. As you know, according to most of statistics, Muslims are about 1.5 billion. Some people say more, some people maybe say less. But as average, we can say about 1.5 billion Muslims are in the world. And maybe there are about 2 billion Christians in the world. So Muslims and Christians together would form more than half of the population of the world. And if we add Jews and think about Abrahamic faith, again we are more than half population of the world. Islam is the second largest religion in the world after Christianity, but the estimation is that Islam is the fastest growing religion, and also it seems that it's the most discussed religion. If you look at media or any, newspaper, websites, it seems that it's the most discussed religion, and perhaps also the most misunderstood religion. So it's important for us to try to have a sound understanding of this important reality of 21st century. Muslim population is spread all over the world. More than 200 countries you have, Muslims present. But there is a misconception that some people think most of Muslims and majority of Muslims are Arabs or are from Middle East, which is not the case. The majority of Muslims are non-Arabs. 85% of Muslims are non-Arabs. Only about 15% of Muslims are Arabs. And majority of Muslim population is not actually in the Middle East. Majority of Muslim population starts from eastern border of Iran. You go Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, we have large Muslim population in India, Indonesia, Malaysia. So the great majority of Muslims are in Asia and not in, Middle East only or North Africa. Inside Muslim world, we have differences of denominations or schools. One very broad way of classification is to divide Muslims into Sunni and Shia, but sometimes they divide them into Sunni, Shia, Khawarij, Ibadids, Sufis, there are different ways, but the common way is Sunni Shia, and we don't have exact statistics. Some people say maybe 12%, some say 20% of Muslims are Shia, some say maybe 15%. So something like this. Shia are mainly in Iran as a majority, in Bahrain as a majority, in Republic of Azerbaijan as a majority, in Iraq as a majority, in Lebanon as the largest minority. So there is no one group that has majority in Lebanon, but the Shia are the largest minority. And then you have them also in other countries, like part of, for example, Saudi Arabia and many countries. So it's a spread, but mainly the main population is in that area that I mentioned. Then we have 4 schools of Sunni Islam, if you want to consider jurisprudence, because you can classify Sunni Muslim according to their kalam or theological ideas, Ash'arite, Mu'tazilites, Maturidis, Ibadids. You can classify them according to jurisprudence, according to fiqh, which is very common. So according to fiqh, we have 4 major schools. We have Hanafi Muslims, Maliki Muslims, Shafi'i Muslims, and Hanbali Muslims. So Hanafis are mostly in Egypt, in Lebanon, part of Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Turkey. Malikis are more in Morocco and Sudan. Shafi'is, again in Syria, in Yemen, in Oman, United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain, the Sunni population in Bahrain, Kuwait, and also they coexist in Jordan and Egypt. And Hanbalis are more in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. It is the official denomination of the states in these 2 countries. So this gives you a kind of idea about the landscape inside the Muslim community. And I will try, if I get a chance, to talk about some of the differences between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, but my presentation is now more general because we want to understand Islam as a religion. Again, before I go to the book, I would like to mention for you a little bit background starting with Abraham, because I think we cannot understand Islam if we don't understand Abraham and the role that Abraham plays in the Quran and in introducing Islam. You know that Abraham had no children for a long time, till he became very old. And then his wife Sarah suggested to him to marry the maid, the slave that they had, Hagar. So Abraham married Hagar, and when she was pregnant, some problems started to happen between Sarah and Hagar, as mentioned also in Genesis. If you study Genesis, I give you some references to Genesis, you would find that when she was pregnant, she had to sometimes go away so that she is away from her mistress and would not be in difficulty. And an angel went to her and asked her to go back and be obedient to her mistress, but gave her also the good news, the glad tidings. So you can refer to Genesis 16:10. For example, the angel said to Hagar, I will increase your descendants, according to the modern translation. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So this is referring to progeny of Abraham through Hagar and Ishmael. So the angel told that your descendants will be too many to count. In Genesis 17, verse 20, God says, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. This is God telling Abraham. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. So this is God telling Abraham about Ishmael. In Genesis 21, verse 13, God says, I will make the son of the slave, means Hagar, into a nation also. So there would be a nation through Isaac, but says, I will make the son of the slave also a nation, because he is your offspring. Then Genesis refers to the story of Hagar and Ishmael when they had to leave. According to the Bible, they had to go to a land between Red Sea and great rivers of Iraq, like Euphrates and Dejla, Tigris. So when she and her baby were away, the baby was thirsty, and there was no water, was crying. So Genesis chapter 21 verse 17 says, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. So you see that through Abraham, there would be two nations, and God has not only foreseen, but has blessed and promised to support. One is through Isaac, through whom we have all the Hebrew prophets. Isaac had, Jacob had Joseph, and then it comes to Moses, and then it comes to Jesus. And through Ishmael, we come to Prophet Muhammad, and also 12 Imams that we Shia have. So it's very important to remember that we are talking about one family and one tradition. And if you are interested, I have a series of 10 lectures given in the shrine of Lady Ma'souma in Qom called Abraham, the Founder of Islam. And based on many Quranic verses, I have argued that our Prophet didn't bring a new religion. He reinstated the religion of Abraham and invited everyone to go back to the religion of Abraham, which was submission to God, and that is Islam. And our Prophet was very hesitant to give this a new name. Because when you give a new name, then people think that this is a new reality. People are very quick in giving names. But the idea was, no, this is the same religion of Abraham. And if you refer to the Quran in different chapters, in those lectures I have mentioned this, but for example, you can just go to chapter 2, the second chapter, which is the largest chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow, from verses 127 to 134. Chapter 2, 127 to 134, just as an example. The passage is very, very clear about what was the plan of God through Abraham. If I get chance, I will go back to this in the second session. So, Prophet Muhammad is a progeny of Abraham through Ishmael, and he was born in 570 according to the Christian calendar. He was for 40 years living in Mecca and doing some also trade trips, but it was at the age of 40 that he started receiving revelation. So for 40 years, he lived with the people in a very pious way. Even before he became the prophet, the pagans used to call him Al-Amin, the honest. If they had any problem, they used to go to him and ask him to judge. If they wanted to entrust their valuables, they used to go. And it's interesting that 13 years later, when the Prophet wanted to migrate to Medina, because the situation in Mecca was very terrible, I will explain later, still he had some of the trust of the pagans of Mecca. So the pagans used to kill Muslims, torture them, but still they used to leave their valuables with Prophet because they knew he's not going to betray. So for 40 years, he was living a very contemplative life. He used to go many times to a cave outside Mecca, which is still available, and pilgrims to Mecca go and visit, called Hira, to distance himself from that society, because that society was a society which was not only worshipping idol, but also they were practicing lots of immoral things, like, killing, like robbing, even burying their daughters alive. So there were lots of problems. So the Prophet used to go to that cave for days, sometimes for weeks, and contemplate. When he was 40 in that cave for the first time, he saw Gabriel, and the first revelation came, which is the beginning of chapter Alaq, the cloth. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read in the name of your Lord who has created. So this is year 610. And then for about 13 years, the Prophet lived in Mecca, and initially the invitation was not for public. He only shared it with very few people. Then a verse was revealed to him to start with his kinship. وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Start the mission by now proclaiming it to your kinship. And there's a story how he invited his relatives and introduced Islam to them. Some of them accepted, some of them didn't accept. Some of the most hostile enemies of the Prophet were from his own family, like his uncle, who was very hostile towards him. So, one of his uncles, of course, I'm talking about Abu Lahab, because he had also uncles who believed in him and supported him, like Hamza, like Abu Talib. Then the mission was introduced to other people. Gradually, some people embraced Islam. And when the number started to increase, the rulers and leaders of Quraysh, which was the same tribe from which Prophet had come, but other branches of the tribe who were ruling the Mecca, and they were doing lots of also business because it was a place of pilgrimage and also a place for trade. They didn't like this idea because their main income was by people coming and worshipping the idols, and also by them claiming that they have some privilege. They wanted to have some privilege. Just to give you an example, one of the bad things they used to say was they used to ask pilgrims, because pilgrimage started from the time of Abraham, but over time they deviated it to people coming and worshipping statues of the idols which were kept inside the Kaaba, which is the place that Abraham had built. They used to tell pilgrims, no matter where you come from, you have to purchase your dress inside Mecca. You cannot use your dress which comes from outside. If you don't want to buy a dress here, you have to go around Kaaba nakedly. Either you buy from here, so you can see this is because they wanted to make money. They were twisting pilgrimage of people in this way. So they found Islam to be a threat for them. They started sending messages to Prophet. For example, a very clear incident that you can also watch it in the movie Message was Abu Sufyan, who was the leader of Quraysh at that time, and some of the secondary leaders. They went to Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet, and they told him, speak to your nephew and tell him whatever money he wants, we give him. We give him the most beautiful Arab women. We give him power. Just ask him to stop preaching this idea of monotheism and, worshipping only one God. So he took the message to the Prophet, and the Prophet said, if they put sun in one hand of mine and moon in the other hand, I'm not going to stop. This is my mission that I have to fulfill. So they started by bringing such temptations. It didn't work. Then they started putting pressure. They started torturing Muslims. Some of the Muslims were killed. The first woman who was killed was Sumayya, who was tortured. She was a slave. She embraced Islam. They killed her. They killed her husband. They tortured their son Ammar, but he was saved. So they put lots of pressure. Then Prophet told a group of Muslims to migrate to Habasha, Ethiopia. Today it's called Ethiopia, Habasha. And it's very interesting for Muslim-Christian relation. Prophet told them, you should go to Ethiopia because the king there is a Christian king and he's a just person. If you go to him, because he is just, he would treat you justly. So a group of Muslims, men and women, under the leadership of Ja'far, they went there. So Ja'far had a conversation with the king. The reason for this conversation was because some of the tradesmen of Quraysh who had good relation with the king were sent by the leaders of Quraysh to ask the king to send them back. And they were friends of the king. So they started saying bad things about these people. These people have brought new religion. These people, are dividing our community, and so on and so forth. So the king, Najashi, he called Ja'far, called them, and it was his justice and wisdom that he brought them together and listened to both of them. And Ja'far explained that we worship the same God. And he started reading some of the verses of the Quran about Lady Mary, about Jesus. And finally, the king said, we are very close to each other, and I'm not going to send them back. So they stayed there for a few years. But the remaining population in Mecca had a very difficult situation. Then in Medina is a town 300 kilometers towards north of Mecca. So if you have Arab Peninsula, Mecca is on the west side towards south, 300 kilometers above towards north is Medina. People of Medina were mostly Arab tribes from Aus and Khazraj. So there were two tribes, Aus and Khazraj. There were also some people of the book. There were some Jewish tribes and some Christians, but the greatest population was Aus and Khazraj. Aus and Khazraj had lots of conflicts. For years, they were involved in conflict and killing each other. They were fed up. So they sent their representatives to meet Prophet in Mecca, and they invited him to join them in Medina and to unite them. So after receiving this invitation and after they paid allegiance to Prophet, the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina, which was called Yathrib, but then it was called Medina. Medina means city, town. Madinatun Nabi means the town of the Prophet. Now it is known as Medina. So this is the beginning of Islamic calendar. So Islamic calendar that we have now today, we have in lunar way or solar way, it starts not with the beginning of Islam. It starts with the migration of Prophet from Mecca to Medina. So this is the beginning of Islamic calendar. And the Prophet lived in Medina for 10 years. So in 622, he migrated. In 632, he passed away. These 10 years were very important years for formation of Muslim community, because in Mecca, they didn't have ability to exercise, practice freely, and there were individuals, but under pressure. In Medina, they started to form a community, but they had lots of challenges because the pagans used to send people to attack, so they had battles. They had to defend themselves. But towards the end of the life of the Prophet, so that is only a matter of 23 years, all Arab Peninsula almost became Muslim. And then towards the end of his life, the Prophet sent letters to the Roman emperor, to Iranian emperor, to other kings, and then he passed away. We can continue this historical discussion afterwards, but I stop here just because I thought this is the formative period. It's important to think about this in the context of Abrahamic tradition. Now, if you look at the book, we can quickly maybe review some major aspects of the book. There is an introduction. In this introduction, I have explained that how much Muslims share. Unfortunately, we have to be human beings. Whether we are Muslims or Christians or Jews or any faith, we have this problem that we pay more attention to differences than our commonalities. Even I think maybe that is the way our mind works. You know, if you look at the people who are here, just as an example, what do you notice first? If you look at the people around this room, what you notice first is that we are different in age, in gender, maybe in color, in dress. You need to make efforts to notice our commonalities. Because the way our mind works is that uses differences to identify. Of course, in a more underlying level, commonalities are there. So we know that we are all human beings and we share our humanity. But it goes lower, and what comes to your mind first is the differences. Through differences, we identify each other. Many times, because of differences, unfortunately, we forget the great commonalities that we have. When it comes to Muslims, they share a lot. They share the same God, the same Prophet, the same Quran, the same book. Many practices that I'm going to mention, they are all the same. There are differences, but differences are also found within the same school of Islam, within the same denomination or sect. As I will explain in the second session, again, when it comes to the Abrahamic faith, we share a lot. I am not saying even we share 50% and we differ 50%. I will explain later that in my understanding, Abrahamic religions share 90%, if not more. Because the main thing is submission to God, and we share that. How to submit is another issue. But we cannot say submission to God is equal to how to submit. If someone is ready to submit himself to God and to the absolute truth, that's the main thing. For me, this is more than 90%. Then, if you are really submissive to God, then you do your best to find out what is the best way to submit to please God. So, in the introduction, I mentioned something about the commonalities between Muslims and how they share most of the things. The first chapter starts with some introduction to major sources for understanding Islam. Obviously, the most important source is the Quran. The Quran is, according to Muslims, word of God, literally. So Muslims believe that whatever is there is a word of God. It's not even inspiration coming from God and then phrased by the prophet. Both meanings and wording come from God. So it's very important to understand the significance of Quran for Muslims. Maybe this comparison would help Christians to understand better. You know, for Christians, Jesus is Word of God. And therefore, they have great attachment to Jesus more than the Bible. Of course, Bible is very important, but they don't believe that the Bible is revealed by God, literally, especially the New Testament. These are reports about the ministry of Jesus that are written by those four personalities, John, Luke, Mark, Matthew, of course, inspired by the Holy Spirit. But it's not that this is the revelation, because in the era of Jesus, in the new era, new covenant, God, instead of sending revelation, God has revealed himself in his Son. So Jesus is the word of God and his revelation. For Muslim, revelation is the Quran. So it's like, for example, Jesus for Christians. Revelation is the Quran. Quran is word of God. Every letter comes from God. And the prophet is recipient of the revelation. The prophet is not revelation. So the Quran is very, very important for Muslims. And the Quran was revealed over 23 years. But to be more precise, the Quran was revealed over 20 years. Because there was a period of 3 years that revelation didn't come. So from the time it started till the death of the Prophet is 23 years, but there were 3 years fatra that God didn't send any revelation to Prophet, and then God started sending revelation to the Prophet. So some part of the Quran is revealed in Mecca, some part in Medina. But the way the Quran is put together doesn't reflect the chronological order. It's not that the first chapter was revealed the first, the second chapter was revealed the second. This is not based on the chronology. This way of classification, Muslim scholars have differences of opinions. Some people say it's according to the instruction given by the Prophet, and some say it was later, but definitely you can find in the same chapter verses which were revealed in different times. For example, a chapter like second chapter, definitely it was not revealed at once. The way right now it is put is you have the first chapter, which is the opening, like preface, which is very important. This is Surah Al-Hamd that we recite in every prayer. Then you start with the largest chapters, and then you have intermediate chapters, then you end with short chapters. So this is the order that we have. But the way revelation came is different. There are books that tell you, according to some evidence, even some scientists try to bring some scientific analysis to tell you when each verse was revealed. But we cannot be 100% sure. But we know that these are, for example, Meccan verses. These are verses which were revealed in Mecca. These are the verses which are revealed in Medina. In general, the verses which were revealed in Mecca relate more to beliefs, to dogmas, to major principles of morality, and those which relate to the code of law, legislation, practical rulings, to fiqh, these are more coming in in Medina, and even gradually. So these are some general points. So the Quran is the most important source for all Muslims. And if you go to any part of the world, you find the same Quran. From east to the west, north to the south, you find identical Quran available. The second important thing which comes after the Quran is this, what we call Sunnah. And what we mean by Sunnah, the sayings of the Prophet, or the deeds of the Prophet, or tacit approval, taqrir. What does it mean? Sometimes the Prophet said something. Sometimes the Prophet did something. And for us, his actions are examples that we should follow. Sometimes the Prophet didn't say or do something, but something was presented to him, something was practiced in front of him, and he didn't object. So if we can establish that Muslims in the time of the Prophet had this practice and the Prophet didn't object, then this shows that this was acceptable. Because if something was not acceptable acceptable, he had to stop them. So this is called taqrir, means tacit approval. So the sunnah of the Prophet is helping us with many, many details. The Quran itself says that one of the tasks of the Prophet was to recite to people the divine communications, and the other task was to teach them the book. So the Prophet was the first interpreter and teacher of the book, and he was the one who gave details. For example, how to say prayer. The Quran mentions some of the major points. There are lots of details. We learn it from Sunnah. How to fast, how to go to Mecca for pilgrimage, how to give alms. Many, many details are to be learned from Sunnah. The Quran has only about 600 verses about jurisprudence. So it is less than 10% of the Quran is about, Sharia or jurisprudence. Most of the details comes from Sunnah. For Shia, the teaching of the household of the Prophet, the Imams are very important source in order to understand the Sunnah of the Prophet. Because the Prophet referred the Muslim nation to the book and to his household. But for Sunni Muslims, the household of the Prophet are very important. They love them, but they don't give a special status to them. Mostly they consider all the companions of the Prophet as reliable sources, and they say that you can refer to all the companions of the Prophet. There are technical issues here. I don't want to go into that discussion now. Then we have reason. Muslims are asked, according to the Quran, to be people of thinking, to use their intellect to think, to reflect, to ponder on the signs of God in the horizons, or to ponder on the verses of the Quran in the book of God. So the book of creation and book of guidance. To think is very important. Some Muslims have taken reason as one of the sources for understanding Islam, like Shia. For the Shia Muslims, reason or intellect is a source for understanding Islam. If you want to understand the Quran, you want to understand the Sunnah, you have to understand them in the way which would not conflict with reason. Some Muslim may have regard for reason, but maybe not necessarily as a source for understanding. Again, here there are some differences. We have no time to go into differences. The other thing is consensus, ijma'. If all Muslims agree on some issue, then this can be a sign that this is acceptable in Islam. For Sunni Muslims, consensus is very important because they narrate this hadith from the Prophet that my nation would not agree on error. لَن تَجْتَمِعَ أُمَّتِي عَلَى خَطَأ. It's impossible that all my nation agree on a mistake. At least some of them should disagree if there is a mistake, not all of them 100%. For the Shia, this hadith is not established as authentic hadith, and for them, consensus is valid if it can help you to understand the Sunnah, not just agreement of people. Agreement as such is not a proof. Then the second chapter is about doctrines, based on the Quran, on the Sunnah, and reason. These are the doctrines and some details about them. Of course, if you want to study more, I can refer you to more detailed books. And currently with few scholars, we are working on a project of 5 books. This is the first volume published, Islamic Belief System. And This is just about the beliefs. Then there are four more other books coming about practices, about morals, about Islamic way of life. So here we are just talking about very fundamental things. Unity of God, Tawheed. If you study the Bible and the Quran, you find that more emphasis is put on qualities of God and unity of God, for example, than existence of God. Existence of God is not something that which is very much in need of discussion. Existence of God is very obvious. The Quran says, "Afillahi shakkun." Is there any doubt about God? There are some verses in the Quran that argues for the existence of God. For example, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Are they created from nothing? Or have they created themselves? The answer is neither they have been created from nothing, nor they have created themselves. So they have to be created by a creator. So there are arguments for the existence of God, but the main focus of the Quran is unity of God. Even the idol worshippers, they didn't deny God. They had a polytheistic understanding of God. It's not that they denied God. Even the Quran says, if you ask them, the idol worshippers, لَإِنْ سَأَلْتَهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. If you ask them who has created the skies and the earth, لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهِ. They would say God. They don't say these statues have created. But they used these statues as a means of getting nearer to God. مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. They said we worship them so that we can take ourselves nearer to God. So, existence of God was not a problem. The problem was they didn't have correct understanding, and especially unity. And unity of God is very, very important. And if unity of God is understood properly, it would change your life. It's not just a dogma in theology. Unity of God is the basis and foundation of pious life. In Mecca, the Prophet used to say to people, قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ تُفْلِحُوا. Say, there is no God but one God, and then you would be happy. You would have salvation. So if you honestly and wholeheartedly commit yourself to monotheism, to unity of God, then you won't gain everything. So lots of discussion about unity of God is available in Islamic theology, in Islamic spirituality, in Islamic mysticism. It's a very important topic. And one aspect of unity of God is the unity that you find in the creation. If you go any part of the world, you don't find isolation. You don't find a vacuum. You don't find, compartments. It's one world created by one God. You don't find any separation or gap. The second aspect of unity of God is unity in His revelation. So, God has sent different prophets. God has sent different books. But they are the same in essence. They come from the same God for human beings who have the same nature. So there are differences in details, but they are the same in essence. And this is why Muslims should believe and confirm all previous prophecies, all previous revelations, all previous books. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله. The Prophet believes in God and what has been revealed to him, and the believers believe in God and whatever has been sent by God as books and all the prophets, and they say we don't discriminate against any prophet. So there are 124,000 prophets. Muslims have to believe in all of them. And if there was a way to meet any of these prophets, you should have listened to them, you should obey them, because they are all sent by God for our guidance. So, the unity of God has been reflected in creation, in revelation, and it is also to us to show it in the way we relate to each other. God wants us to be united. It's very important. If we are divided, we cannot say we are close to God. Divided people are not close to God. United people can be close to God. We will talk about it in the second session. Divine justice. One of the qualities of God, which all Muslims agree, is justice of God. But historically, a debate started in early centuries of Islam. How to explain justice of God. You know, in philosophy and Western also theology, we have this issue of divine command theory. How to define what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. In Islam, we have also the same debate. Some people like the Ash'arites, they had this idea that whatever God says or commands or does is good, by definition. It means that there is no independent criteria for understanding what is right or wrong. When God says something is good, it becomes good. When He says something is bad, it becomes bad. God says you should keep your promise, so keeping promise has become good. If He had said another way, then we should have done it another way. So for these people who believe in a kind of divine command theory, there is no independent, objective criteria for goodness and badness. So for these people, whatever God does is just, because justice is what God does. So whatever He does cannot be unjust because it's by definition. But there were people like Mu'tazilites and the Shiites. They were called Al-Adliyah, the people of justice. Not because others denied justice. No, they all believed in justice of God. But because they said justice is objective. Justice is something that is independently understandable. They say it's impossible for God to say something which is unjust. For example, God would never say, treat innocent people unjustly, cruelly, or for example, don't keep your promises, don't, tell the truth. There are some objective criteria for this. Anyway, that debate, which started in the first century but became very intense in second, third century, made some Muslims concerned about the issue of justice. Therefore, some people like Mu'tazilites, who were a group of Sunni theologians, and the Shiites, made them very concerned about justice, so they made this as one of the principles of their understanding of Islam. Divine justice, but also this should be connected to social justice. I don't have time to talk about social justice now, but it's a very important aspect of Islam, especially in Shia Islam. Then prophethood. All Muslims believe that although we have been given ability to discern between what is good, what is bad. We have been given this ability. We have moral conscience. We have our intellect. We can use our intellect, but still God has helped us further by providing us with revelation. The job of revelation is to correct our misunderstanding, to teach us things that we were not able to understand by ourselves, and to provide us with sanctions. So there are three tasks for revelation. Reason and revelation don't conflict, but revelation supplements reason. The Quran doesn't mention how many prophets were sent. What the Quran says is that God has sent prophets to all nations. لَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا. We have sent to all nations a messenger. According to the hadith, hadith is saying of the prophet, not Quran. 124,000 prophets were sent. 124,000 prophets. The number is in hadith, not in the Quran is saying to every nation. But the hadith says 124,000 prophets. Many of these prophets we don't know by names. Some of them we know by names. The Quran mentions 25 prophets by names, but says there are many that we haven't mentioned their stories to you. So, maybe there were prophets in, I don't know, China, maybe prophets, for example, Latin America, everywhere. We don't know them, but we know that God has sent prophets to all nations. Among 124,000 prophets, 25 are mentioned by name in the Quran, and many of them are the prophets that are also mentioned in the Bible. Many of them are common. Adam, then we have Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Jacob, Joseph, all these prophets. The Quran also says that God has sent books. But it's not that every prophet was given a book. Many prophets didn't receive a book. They received revelation, but not that everyone received a book. Some of them preached the book which was given to another prophet. And here we have a distinction to make between Nabi and Rasul. Rasul, the messengers or the apostles, were those who were given a special message to deliver. And these are only 313. Anyway, I don't want to go to that discussion. So there are books. We don't know how many. The Quran refers to 4 books other than the Quran. The book of Abraham, the book of Moses, which is Torah, the book Gospel of Jesus, and also the Psalms of David. So these are some of the books which are mentioned, but there were more books, we don't know how many. Then the Quran talks about Prophet Muhammad being the last prophet. This is the concept of Khatmun Nubuwwah. So we believe that no prophet would come after Prophet Muhammad, and the Quran is the last and final revelation of God. So after that, there is no new revelation, new book coming. What remains is to refer back to the same book and use it. This book is preserved, and there is no need for new book to come, but Muslims should make sure that they have proper understanding. So now the challenge is the challenge of interpretation, the challenge of understanding, how to understand the book. In Shia Islam, we have also imamah as a principle, which is, although no revelation is coming after the prophet, there would be no prophethood, but we believe that divinely appointed leadership continue. So, after the prophet, there will be 12 imams, one after the other, who are not receiving revelation or book or new law, but they are infallibles. They are protected by God. They are inspired by God. So they present pure Islam, and they are also continuing the spiritual legacy of the Prophet. So these are called imams. For non-Shia, there is no institution of imamah, so it's caliphate, successorship to the Prophet. successor to the Prophet can be decided by people, can be decided by a council, or previous Caliph can appoint the next Caliph. So there are different ways that in Sunni Islam they choose who would be in charge of the political, religious affairs of the community. But for Shia Islam, there are 12 people who are divinely appointed, and these 12, according to many hadiths, are mentioned, the number of 12. I have mentioned this in some of my publications. And also the Shia believe that those 12 leaders that are mentioned in the Bible coming from Ishmael are these 12. The 12th is in occultation. The 12th Imam, which is Imam Mahdi, which is of course accepted by all Muslims, but Sunni and Shia have a difference of opinion about the identity. Many Sunni Muslims believe that Mahdi is not yet born. He would come in the end of time and would establish justice all over the world. This much is universal. All Muslims accept that he would establish justice in the end of the world. But many Sunni Muslims say he is not yet born. There have been some Sunni leaders who actually claim to be Mahdi. So they thought they were the same Mahdi which hadiths talk about it. In Shomali, in Sudan, we had Mahdis that they thought that they are the same personality. There were some Sunni writers that I have mentioned that they believed that Mahdi was born, and like Shia, they believe that Mahdi is the son of Imam Askari, the 11th Imam. According to Shia, Imam Mahdi was born in 255 after Hijrah. So if the Prophet was born in 610 and then in 622 he migrated, you add 255 to 622, so it would be, yes, 817. That would be the birth of Imam Mahdi. But because the caliphs of that time, they wanted to kill him because they knew that he's going to establish justice. So his birth was secret. People were not informed about his birth except very few people. And then as soon as his father was killed, because all the imams were killed, all of them are martyrs. So as soon as his father was killed, in the age of 5, he went to what we call ghaiba, occultation. So occultation started 260, and then we have minor occultation and major occultation. So we believe as Shia that he is alive. He sees us, we might see him, but we don't know who he is. Every season of Hajj, he goes to Hajj. People can see him, but normally they don't know who he is. And all Muslims, Sunni and Shia, have narrated this hadith from Prophet that when he comes, Jesus also would come. This is not only by Shia. All Muslims have this hadith that when Mahdi comes, Jesus also would come. And they will be together. Even the hadith says, at the time of the prayer, Imam Mahdi offers to Jesus to lead the congregation, and Jesus says, you lead the congregation. So this is a sign of them working together at that time. Then we have resurrection. A very important aspect of Abrahamic faith is to believe in the hereafter. To believe that our life is not just this short physical life that we have here. We are going to be there forever. We are not going to perish by death. We are going to survive death. There would be a temporary world, we call it barzakh, but after that the day of judgment, and then people would go to hell or heaven depending on what they have done. So every Muslim has to always prepare himself or herself for being accountable, being answerable to God. Everything you do, everything you say, every intention, you will be questioned. Every blessing that God has given you, you have to be ready to say how you used it. So this is a very important aspect of Islam, and of course, in Christianity also we have the hereafter, and in Judaism we have the hereafter. So it's very important. Then we have practices. In the Quran, we have many practical instructions. I mention only some of them, which are the most notable ones. One is ritual prayer. And this is different from prayer in the sense of supplication. We should always pray to God. But the formal or ritual prayer, daily prayers, are 5. So every Muslim says 5 prayer every day. There are exceptions. For example, when women are in period, then they are not saying 5 times prayer. Or for example, children who have not yet reached the age of puberty or bulugh, they don't need, although they are recommended to start when they become understanding. These 5 times of prayer are in different units. The prayer of Fajr or dawn, after dawn, before sun rises, we have 2 units of prayer. So each unit starts with some recitations, then we bend, and then we prostrate. So there are some recitations and some invocations and something to do, but it's divided according to the units, rak'ah. So for Fajr, there are 2 units. For midday, when sun is going from the middle of the sky towards the west, the time of midday prayer starts, and that is 4 units. Then we have afternoon prayer, 4 units. After sunsets, we have Maghrib, which is 3 units. Then after that, we have Isha, which is 4 units. So we have 17 units, 5 times. But we have also recommended prayers. For example, we have 11 units before dawn. Those who want to be very spiritual, those who want to get closer to God, they try to wake up sometime after midnight before dawn and say these 11 units of prayer. The Prophet used to not sleep too much during the time. He used to sleep a little, wake up and pray, then sleep a little, wake up and pray. So he was dividing his night between sleeping and praying. So this is for people who want to get closer, to God more. But the mandatory are 17. Then one of the important things that every Muslim should also make sure that faces Mecca. So the direction for prayer for all of us is Mecca. So wherever you are in the world, you should find your nearest direction to Mecca. In North America, some time back, there was a discussion. What is the nearest way to Mecca? Because, according to the map, you think that, for example, if you are in the US or Canada, maybe it's east. But actually the map can be misguiding because it's a globe, it's not flat. So the nearest is north east, not just east or southeast. So you have to find your nearest route towards Mecca to say your prayer. And also they have to make sure that they are clean, their dress is clean, and they don't use anything which doesn't belong to them. Everything must be belonging to them. I cannot rob a dress or money and buy my dress, and pray, or make ablution with a water which is not mind. So everything has to be clean and pure. The next practice is fasting. Page 40. So fasting is again something that Quran says existed before Islam. Other Abrahamic religions and even before Abraham, they had some kind of fasting. What was required for those who fast might be different. For example, we can understand from the story of Lady Mary that fasting involved silence. قل إني نذرت للرحمن صوما فلن أكلم اليوم إنسيا. When Jesus was born and Lady Mary didn't know what to say to people, God said to Lady Mary, say, I made a vow to fast, so I don't speak to any human being. Just let baby speak himself. So, fasting involved silence. Now for Muslims, fasting again comes in two forms, obligatory and recommended. Obligatory is in the months of Ramadan. We just had months of Ramadan in June and beginning of July. So in the months of Ramadan, maybe 30 days, maybe 29 days, depending on moon sighting, we fast from dawn till Maghrib sunset. We should not eat, we should not drink, we should not have marital relation. There are few things that we should observe, but also spiritually, we should try to be as much as possible cautious and conscious of God. You are also recommended to fast outside months of Ramadan. It's not obligatory, but it's good to fast. Some hadith says at least 3 days every month you should fast. But it's not obligatory, it's recommended. The other thing is pilgrimage to Mecca. When Kaaba, the cubic construction, which is dressed normally by black in Mecca, that's Kaaba, cubic. This was not built by Abraham in the first place. It was built before Abraham. The Quran says this is the first house built for humanity. إِنَّ أَوَّلَ بَيْتٍ وُضِعَ لِلنَّاسِ لَلَّذِي بِبَكَّةَ مُبَارَكًا. This was the very first house of God and house of humanity. لِلنَّاسِ, for people. But then it was ruined. Abraham was asked to restore. When Ishmael became young, had some power, God asked Abraham with the help of Ishmael to restore Kaaba. وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ وَإِسْمَاعِيلُ. God says, remember the time that Abraham and Ishmael were raising the foundations. So they used the foundations, they built the walls again. And then after they finished, God said to Abraham, call people for pilgrimage. أَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ. Ask everyone to come for pilgrimage. So Muslims go to Mecca for pilgrimage. You can go in different months and perform what we call Umrah, which is a recommended pilgrimage. But the mandatory pilgrimage is in a special season, in the months of Dhul Hajj, which is the last month in the Islamic calendar. So there are few days that you have to be present there, and there are few actions that you have to do. Many of those actions relate to Abraham. So we restore and reconstruct what Abraham did. Many of those actions relate to Abraham, to Hagar, and Ishmael. So every Muslim, if he is well enough, health-wise, money-wise, security-wise, once upon his life or her life must go for Hajj. Some people go more because very spiritual. If you go once, you want to go again and again because very spiritual, very moving. Although sometimes it's difficult, but it's very spiritual. So many people go again and again. But once is enough for the people who are able to go. If you are not able to go, even once is not necessary. The other thing is zakat, almsgiving. In the Quran, charity is very important principle. If you read the Quran, you find that there is no way for salvation without charity. If someone prays day and night, fast all the year, but doesn't get into charity work, is not enough. The Quran says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. It's impossible to reach piety and goodness unless you give out what you love. Not give extra. Sometimes I have something extra that I don't have room in my home. I want to get rid of it. I give it. This is not acceptable. This is just better than nothing. But what you need is to give to people what you love. Not what is disliked, what is outdated, what is, not anymore good for you. Your money is the minimum that you can give. And the Quran says the believers are the people who have fixed a portion of their money for other people. في أموالهم حق معلوم للسائل والمحروم. They have fixed some portion of the money to give to the poor. There are more than 20 verses of the Quran in which establishing prayer and giving alms come together. إقامة الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة. So, it's very important to give alms. And there are obligatory ones and they are recommended ones. But everyone should give. Even the Quran says, even if you are yourself facing shortage of money, still give. مَنْ قُدِرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقُهُ فَلْيُنْفِقْ مِمَّا آتَاهُ اللَّهُ. Even if you have little money, still you should share. This brings more blessing to your life. In Shia Islam, in addition to zakat, we have also khums, which is another charity money that we give. Every Shia has to fix a financial year for himself or herself. And then end of the financial year, we calculate and we give 20% of our extra income to the Grand Ayatollah that we follow to spend on certain causes for poor people, for Sayyids, the progeny of the Prophet who are in need, for common good. So 20% of our extra income every year we give to as charity. The other thing is jihad, a struggle for the sake of God. We need to have maybe one session on jihad only to understand what is jihad, because jihad is something very misunderstood. And unfortunately, even some Muslims misunderstand jihad and mispractice. Jihad means a struggle, means to do your best. The Quranic idea of jihad is that you have to do your best to bring good to society. You cannot be indifferent. You cannot be passive and say, let it happen as it happens. No, you have to contribute to the good of yourself, your family, your community, humanity. So, a very important case of jihad can be education. A very important case of jihad can be helping people with having healthy water, food, different things. And a very important case of jihad also can be to defend the oppressed, the people who have been oppressed, the people whose, for example, land has been occupied. That is also jihad. But it's not only this. What is important is that it has to be done with pure intention, because it's an act of worship. Whether it is education, whether it's helping with health, with food, with money, with helping the oppressed, with defending yourself, it has to be with pure intention. It cannot be for selfish reasons, for tribal reasons, for political gain, for gaining power. No, it has to be for pure intention. And actually, the Prophet said the greatest jihad is to combat yourself. There is a story that once a group of companions of Prophet just came back from a battle. They had won a battle. The Prophet said, "Marhaban biqawmin qadawu al-jihad al-asghar wa baghiya alayhim al-jihad al-akbar." Well done, welcome to the people who won the minor struggle, but now they have to undertake greater struggle. They were surprised. What can be greater than our battle? We were ready to give our life. The Prophet said, the greater struggle is to fight against your ego. This is Jihadul Akbar. And we have hundreds of hadiths about spiritual struggle. And a book is also published in English in London, a translation of these hadiths called Combat with the Self. Unfortunately, some people deny Jihad Akbar. They say we don't have such hadiths. But there are hundreds of hadiths about this. Because without having this, you cannot make sure that you are doing good or you are doing harm. If you don't have pure intention, and if you have not established over years this emptiness from ego, you can do more harm than doing any good. The other thing is enjoining good and forbidding evil. Every Muslim has to rationally, wisely try to bring good to society. One of the requirements is, if you see I am doing something wrong, for example, I am wasting my money, I am wasting my life, I am wasting, my talents, you should tell me. With love, as a brother, as a sister, you should remind me of those things that I should do but I am not doing, or those things that I shouldn't do and I am doing. So every Muslim is asked to feel responsible towards his fellow brothers and sisters, and in this way, if we enjoin each other to observe the good, we can improve. We should not say, I don't bother what they do. No, we are one family, or in some hadiths, like passengers on the same boat. If one person is digging and making a hole, we all be affected. Okay, I think I stop here. So we managed to review quickly 3 chapters, and inshallah we will continue in the next session. Thank you very much. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
very much indeed, Dr. Shomali. We look forward to episode 2 after lunch. I mean, we haven't got time for questions now. I hope there will be some time for questions at the end of the next session. But I wonder if, I was just thinking,